Thanks for coming today. Cobalt is a very interesting element in a lot of ways. It's scientists, it has some unique properties, especially how it interacts with nickel and tames it within the system, within the battery system, that hasn't been able to be replicated. There's been a lot of research of trying to get it out because of the humanitarian crisis that's happening in the DRC, in particular with the artisanal mining. And so I just found my title to be just can't live with it, but can't live without it. It's a very, very unique element indeed. So here's normal disclaimers. So this wouldn't be shocking to most people. We know that BEV sales globally has increased dramatically, especially over the last few years. The main market is in China, and in Europe, obviously, has the regulations in place in order to make sure that the carbon emissions from the transport industry is coming down quite quickly. And so they've been neck and neck, China and Europe, for a very, very long time. And we're now seeing China pull away. But the interesting thing is also in the US. The US obviously has the IRA. It has Tesla, homegrown success story. And I've been giving a lot of talks lately about why EV uptake isn't as big as it should be in the US. And part of the reason is obviously just being able to have this domestic mine production, which is just not happening, and access to the critical minerals within the battery. So this is definitely one of the issues. And if you see, this is what I just talked about. So China is expected to continue to dominate the BEV production. That's true. I know that they're in a little bit of an economic turmoil right now, but within their 5-year plan, they have built an industry, a very strong industry, and guided that industry towards this development. If you look back about 20 years, the Chinese government tried to dominate ICE vehicles. They thought they could make them cheaper, but that just didn't happen. They just didn't happen. So instead of going into the ICE vehicle era, they decided to. They did buy Volvo. That's just a fact. But and some of the European brands, but in the end, they just decided to focus on EV electrification and dominate that. So global BEV production expectation is, we've upgraded it by 3% to 25.3 million units within about 5 years. So this is definitely, when you look at these types of numbers here and you see where the production's coming from, you see that new car sales in those regions are probably going to go up as well. So this is what it looks like on a vehicle by vehicle basis. So Tesla has cobalt within its battery system. They have announced that they've been trying to get it out, but this is not an easy task. When you talk to the scientists, it's very easy to do everything on the benchtop level, but once you go into mass market and once you have all those supply chains in place, once you have all of those cell lines in place, it's very difficult to change course. And BYD actually has dominated in this chemistry called LFP, lithium iron phosphate. What's very interesting about lithium iron phosphate, it was actually invented by the University of Texas, and then it had a very strange patent position in Quebec, of all places. And so the Swiss conglomerate was managing the patent position, and all of a sudden China doesn't have to adhere to these types of patent rules. So we say that it was born in Texas, raised in Quebec, and now lives in China. A lot of the expertise in LFP is in China, and the supply chains to actually build these batteries and the expertise is in China right now. So we are definitely, when we're talking about the IRA, so all of BYD's vehicles are LFP. So this is the largest company in the world, has surpassed Tesla 2 years ago. So it's a very interesting predicament when you look at cobalt and the nickel-based chemistries that it is important to, and then this new element of LFP coming back from the dead, basically, because everybody thought that it was not going to happen. Everybody, because the energy density was low, Nobody thought it was going to happen. So they just basically focused on their research outside of China on nickel-based chemistries that include cobalt. So it's not surprising then to say that high nickel NMC will likely to dominate in North America. This is because this is where the know-how is. So what we have is everybody talks about how battery chemistry is changing, and it actually hasn't changed that much. It's been tweaked. It's more of like a stepwise change where the improvements to the chemistry. Back in 2010, we had LFP, that was in China. Then we had Tesla's nickel, cobalt, and aluminum battery. And then we had all the other OEMs having nickel, manganese, and cobalt. The newest chemistry is NMCA, which is a marriage between Tesla's and NMC. So this is actually a interesting development because everybody says, well, why are we focused on nickel-based chemistries or cobalt if it's going to be out of the system? Well, they've been trying to get cobalt out of the system for 10 years. They've been focused on nickel-based chemistries for over 20 years in this market. So you wouldn't be surprised that, the DRC accounts for 48% of the proven reserves and is responsible for 68% of the global mining production. And the problem is that it's dangerous. There's dangerous conditions to export. There's artisanal mining, which is causing a very, very hard societal issue. I actually just finished a report, and if come up after me, it's just been published last week by the World Bank on the DRC and wanting to try and change their image and try to build the value chain within the DRC, and how difficult it's going to be, because every battery company wants to see that change, but it's not happening because it's just too risky. So there are certain things like although the U.S. signed an MOU with the DRC and Zambia to support regional development, there's no plans yet for a formal strategy. And this is something that, with the IRA and with the planned expansion of growth in the U.S., that this is something that I would just think that that's a no-brainer, where the U.S. can actually start to help and build maybe a special economic zone, work with international organizations, and actually start to pivot the country along the right track. So this is the sole reason why scientists have been trying to get cobalt out of the chemistry. The human rights violations and the fact that it's, concentrated in just one country, which is always bad. So I've alluded to this before, but cobalt is to remain a key cathode ingredient. If you look at the chart on the bottom, you can see that tweaks like perhaps reducing cobalt in the per cell unit, like they went from NMC 111, which is 1 part nickel, 1 part manganese, 1 part cobalt, to NMC 811, which was about 10 years to do that. So that means 811 means 8 parts nickel, 1 part cobalt, 1 part manganese. And this battery has been very hard to control. So it hasn't been easy. When I started in this business and studying this area about 6 years ago, everybody thought it was going to be the big game changer, and it was going to be in EVs in like a year, next year, and cobalt was going to be out of the system. However, cobalt has, again, something about it that just makes it necessary. Nickel runs amok. So one of the things that everybody talks about with nickel is that as you charge and discharge the battery, it starts to compete. If it's not tamed, it starts to compete with lithium. And so when lithium is inserted into the cathode, for example, all of a sudden nickel will go in there. And so then that hole will close, and then all of a sudden the cathode will destruct. So that's what they call lithium mixing, chemical mixing, mixing with the lithium. And so that means that your battery will not last as long. It will not be the operation that it needs to be, especially to power a vehicle. It also means that it's got an increased risk of battery fire. So cobalt and manganese is there for a reason. Cobalt is believed to stop that lithium mixing from happening. Aluminum, so if you look at NCA, for example, that's what Tesla uses. Aluminum does some of that. And we can see how you can push nickel to that limit, but you still have to add those little elements into it. So the bottom line is that a tweak is not a tweak. And there's only been incremental changes to the battery system over the last decade. And what we're going to see is we're going to see more and more incremental changes. And as you, like, let's say if you change the cathode altogether, let's say if you use a lithium manganese oxide, for example, then you'd have to change the graphite anode because it just doesn't work with the graphite anode. So you'd have to work with something else. So then now you're changing that. And that's why that curve goes infinitely, because as you make more changes, there's more risk to the system, battery system, and that's something that automakers don't want. So they don't want to have risk of battery fires, the brand damaging battery fires. They don't want to have these expensive recalls. We've had one already. It was a graphite problem with the LG Chem's battery with GM, as it was in the paper about a couple of years ago. That was very brand damaging for them, and they actually had to rework their chemistry in a way that to make sure that the anode, so this is the graphite side that apparently, because it was like something in the quality control that they missed, and all of a sudden they have this brand. So a tweak is never a tweak. Incremental changes take time. And so if you take cobalt completely out of the system without understanding its properties to nickel, then you have a big problem. So everybody asked me, especially when I was doing the work at the World Bank, is why do I think that cobalt's going to be here to stay? And it will be, on a per cell basis, it'll be smaller. But in general, it's going to go up and up and up. So here we go. This is our supply. So at SFA, we basically look at probable projects, and we do highly probable projects and lower probability projects, and we kind of add them all out. And you can see that right now we're in a surplus situation. The main problem with the surplus situation now is that because the Chinese company CMOC had a dispute last year with their partner, their state-owned partner, Gigamind, and now those stockpiles as of August, so we think about maybe about 15 kilotons at least, that had been stockpiled because they just kept production the way it was until they negotiated something. And so now that's being exported. So that export's going to take time. It's from the DRC. It's like, it's not near Lubumbashi. It's you have like at least 100 kilometers before you can get to Lubumbashi and then get to the border. And there's just problems getting truckers to do that and take that route. It's just too dangerous. So what we see until that CMOC continues to export stockpiles since the dispute has ended, we're going to see some headwinds moving into 2024 for sure. It's just not easy to transport it out. It's not easy to correct this situation. So we do see, however, that there could be a deficit situation if highly probable projects don't come online. So most of those highly probable projects are actually expansions of these mines in the DRC, and unfortunately that does include expansion of artisanal mining. So this was actually a very interesting thing that came out of our nickel research. It's because, we talk about Indonesia and we talk about nickel and how they've been able to extract nickel from laterites and using the HPAL process, principally from Chinese investment and also Malaysia and Korea as well. But in principally, it was Chinese investment, and they, we can talk about the pollution and the everything that's been going on in Indonesia since this industry came to fruition. However, cobalt is now also a byproduct of this nickel mining activity. So it became, like 2 years ago, it wasn't even on the map. And now it represents 6% of cobalt mine production. And that's expected to continue quickly. It's because the HPAL process, you're just able to recover cobalt. The other process, the other ways, it just wasn't feasible. So this is definitely interesting development. And when I was at the my recommendations to the World Bank on what's the value addition projects that they planned in the DRC, it was just like, you better start now, because this is Indonesia is definitely going to be around. They don't have a free trade agreement with the U.S. and they likely won't have one. But in the end, they're going to be a global. They are the global supplier. They will be the global supplier for nickel and cobalt. So if you it's just that you just don't get as much as you would obviously in the DRC. And in the DRC, it's a different process because it's a byproduct of copper. Okay, so then let's look at what's going on with the IRA, because we're in the U.S. I'm from Canada. We've been watching what the IRA. We are actually a big beneficiary of the IRA. We all know what it's all about, what's really interesting about it is that the EV tax credits were transitioned from being like, okay, this is your EV tax credit you can get for all vehicles except for GM and Tesla because they had reached their quota, but they changed it to be more protectionist. So you basically friendshoring any country that has an FTA with the United States. Canada and Mexico obviously has one. But cobalt is very interesting of where those import resources come from in the last, between 2018 and 2021. So in general, there is little domestic mine production in the US and with their FTA partners to support what the IRA's ambitions, period. That's it. So what's very interesting is that I've been watching what the IRA money has been going to, and Jervois, for example, that's in the top corner, is a cobalt. So Idaho is really weird. It has, you can actually mine cobalt there without being a byproduct of nickel or copper. Very, very odd sediment there. It had a mine in place, and it had been a silver mine for a while because silver is actually also a byproduct of cobalt. And then they decided to open it up, and I thought, this is great. But however, the price crashed. It was no longer economical to continue development. And what happened? The IRA money didn't come to it. I just find it really funny that if the nickel-based chemistries is the chemistry choice of all the OEMs in North America, in the US, that there's no nickel or cobalt production in the US. There's only Lundin, and Lundin, the Eagle Mine in Michigan, that was extended from 2025 to 2027. And it didn't get IRA money because it wasn't 5 years out. Like it wasn't something that, and you can see why we're getting, Tesla is making their own agreements with nickel companies and with cobalt companies. It's to secure their own lithium, things like that. See, it's not something that's unusual because considering the situation here. And so this is what's happening in lithium, as you can see. We have a great lithium deposit. I'm not surprised about that, but I am surprised at the lack of nickel and cobalt development. So the Jervois mine has been rescued a little bit. It received $15 million from the Department of Defense. It's really not enough. Yeah, so this is very unusual. And also, Arizona is planning on having a cobalt sulfate plant, and it's supposed to, produce cobalt sulfate to support the whole industry in the U.S. It's just where's the cobalt going to come from? It's processed in China right now, and we just had the first of many, I think, trade restrictions like they did on graphite last week. So where is the funding so far, it has been in lithium and graphite, because graphite, I'm not so worried about graphite just because there's been some development, but I am worried more about cobalt. But that's neither here nor there. We can talk about that for a very long time. These are all the battery. As they've basically awarded most money to next generation technologies, recycling, lithium, which is not on this slide but is on the previous slide, and no real cathode development. They do want to do a plant with LFP, and I think that would be great. But LFP is really great for those bottom markets, like e-bikes and small cars and things like that. But Americans and Canadians, we like our SUVs. We need our SUVs. We need our pickup trucks. We like to have one vehicle. If we have to have one vehicle, we want it to be able to transport our families. It's okay. Pickup trucks, they don't sell very well in Europe, right? So there's a reason why. There's just a lifestyle thing. But this is what's going on. So, the US DOE, I do like the IRA a lot, but I do think that there's a big disconnect between the reality between the mining and the sources of materials and the battery science. I mean, for next generation technology, for sure, it's something that, maybe one or two companies, but we should be actually putting some money into developing the know-how that the Chinese have in here and trying to emulate what Tesla has done. So that's it. So any questions?
On the technology, for example, that Tesla is using, isn't cobalt such a small percentage that it really doesn't matter in trying to get the tax credit overall for the EV manufacturers to worry about sourcing cobalt domestically?
So you're right. It's because the Model 3 and the Model Y, so the Model S is a larger vehicle, and you can't change the chemistry during the design life of the vehicle. And the Tesla Model 3 and Y has been awarded the tax credit. You're correct on that.
So do you see that impacting the drive for domestic sources of cobalt?
No, because Tesla's the only one that uses that chemistry. And they also have one of the top scientists in the world working on with NCA. So it's NCA. That particular chemistry, they have one of the top scientists in the world at the academic level, and he's a scientist, like a pure scientist. So he actually takes Tesla money to see how we can remove it. Right, and so there is like a product called like NMA. So it's nickel manganese, nickel manganese aluminum, and then there's NFA, which is nickel iron and aluminum, but the energy density is a little lower. So that means that is it going to replace the higher energy density vehicles that we need? What Tesla did do, which is very interesting, is switch it to LFP. And once that patent position, I think, is going to be done very, very soon, so they won't have to worry about that. That technology is going to come to their vehicles for lower range vehicles. So lithium iron phosphate, yeah, it's lower, but what was very interesting is so when you have the battery pack, they have like the cells going into a module going into a battery pack, right? And so CATL was able to remove the module because there's not a lot of heat generated within that system. But the high nickel, they're definitely trying. But anything high nickel has thermal instability. So you also need to have like cooling measures and things like that. So you can't, it's not the problem with LFP. Yes. Yeah.
You mentioned DRC and cobalt. My question is, and then you spoke about cobalt globally. Have you found any, and you showed, I think quickly, I can't remember that slide, cobalt projects elsewhere? You mentioned Indonesia, I believe. Have you seen any activities within Africa and other places other than DRC where, for example, the practices are more humane?
That's a very good question. So South Africa has a huge PGM, and they have been known to be a little bit more humane. That's a very good way of putting it. And Zambia has had a okay, so I did my homework. So Zambia is so right now the copper and the cobalt comes through Lubumbashi. Copper comes across the country sometimes from the top, but the cobalt comes from Lubumbashi and goes through Zambia to the coast. And so Zambia is a very important, actually, nickel provider. So if you take the tail, like I did this for the World Bank, but it didn't make my map didn't make it into the report. And I'll send you the report. Just give me your card and I'll send you the report. But anyway, if you look at the tail of Africa, you can actually put together the NMC battery for the whole world. Pretty much, yeah. Because manganese is South Africa, too. So South Africa, Zambia is nickel, and then cobalt, and so you can actually put the NMC in, for the whole world. But we have to do it in a humane and environmentally sensitive way, which is another talk.
Can we have that talk right now? Because that's what I was gonna ask.
I have 3 minutes.
That's what I was gonna ask. A lot of investors, not just retail investors, but institutional investors, are really asking a lot from the companies they invest in,
Yes, they
ESG specifically. I'm
Yes.
wondering if cobalt is so indispensable in the EV transition, what can companies do to become more ESG friendly, and what are they doing now that you're seeing, please?
Okay, so just to back up about, if cobalt's so indispensable, they thought it was dispensable. So they spent a lot of research trying to get it out of the system. They thought that was the solution to this. And now I feel like, I talk to companies that want to invest in the DRC and make things better, but it's too risky for their parents, the parent companies or anything like that. So this is what's happening. And so from an ESG perspective in the DRC, not very much has been happening. So, and then in Canada, what we've seen is that all of a sudden, the prices have to be quite big. So if you actually look at the cost curve of copper in that report, if you said, give me your card, I can send you that report. You see that the DRC actually produces copper like cheaply, like because of the way it is. But outside of the DRC, you really have to make sure that price is higher, and that's what happened with the Idaho mine. So the incentive pricing changes, and so you do have, because you have these regulations in place. And one of the things that I'm actually interested in from an ESG perspective with the mining industry is the fact that you restart mines with ore bodies that have been abandoned with the intention of cleaning it up, because that becomes a brownfield development instead of a greenfield development. And I just we heard of, I was at a conference, speaking at a conference a couple weeks ago, specifically on the IRA. And we heard from like just junior mining companies up in the Yukon, and there was someone literally sitting next to me saying, I was there 30 years ago. I know exactly what happened. And it was very, very interesting to see this connection happening. And I thought that was very exciting. So one of the things that can happen is that we can go in to like the US and come in with some of the experience we've had to make sure that the mine sites are clean and help the DRC develop some of their assets that way. That would be what I'd like to see happen. Did I answer your question, or I can answer it several different ways?
Mostly yes, but I think there's a lot of conversation that needs to go on for ESG friendly strategies to produce these mines.
And I also think that there needs to be a better standard of what ESG means that is everybody knows because exactly because so I had a chat with somebody who's was based in China, now came back home to based in the Midwest and working to develop some of the critical mineral sites and mining sites, as well as precursors and things like that. And he was saying that, like, when I was talking to him, he goes, everybody's at the same point. Everybody doesn't know what to do. You could be, a large company and you don't know what to do. You're just basically trial and error. There's how many different types of ESG protocols and things like that, and they don't know how to do it. So it's something that an industry should be talking about and trying to work with the public to try and make mining a less of a evil force, because this is necessary for the energy transition. I mean, I've heard several people in the mining industry lament about the fact that your iPhone, my iPhone, like, can't live without it, has DRC cobalt that was probably mined by children. So I mean, this is something that the industry as a whole has to do, and definitely a discussion that we need to have. But we have to have the standard. No one has gotten it yet. We can all do this together moving forward.